I remember the silence most of all, a silence so thick and heavy it smothered the very air in the grand dining hall of Blackwood Manor. At 18 years old, I, Alara Vance, stood frozen beside a wedding cake that looked more like a tombstone made of sugar and fondant. My fingers were locked around the ceremonial knife's ivory handle. I wasn't a bride, I was a sacrifice. The whispers were the only sound, slithering through the candlelit room like poisonous snakes. Poor girl, they hissed, sold to a dying man. The Duke of Blackwood won't see the spring, a marriage bed that will be a widow's chamber by Christmas. My cheeks burned, but I kept my spine straight. That much my Aunt Cordelia had beaten into me since my parents' ship sank into the cold Atlantic. She appeared beside me now, a viper in emerald silk, her grip like iron on my elbow. "You will smile," she breathed into my ear, her voice sweet with venom. "You have secured a ducal title when you deserved nothing. You have saved us from debtor's prison. Do not ruin this with your pathetic trembling." The chamber orchestra's music died. The major domo struck his staff 3 times against the marble. The sound echoed like a death knell. "His Grace Alistair Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood." The sea of silk and jewels parted, and there he was, my husband. The gossip had prepared me for a monster of gluttony, a grotesque figure to be pitied and ridiculed. They did not prepare me for the reality. Alistair Thorne was a mountain of a man, broad-shouldered and tall, but he moved with the careful, agonizing precision of someone walking across shattered glass. His handsome face, pale and strained, was a mask of sheer willpower. He was only 32, but he carried his weight like a condemned man carries his chains. His eyes, a startling, clear gray, swept the room and missed nothing. Not the pity, not the mockery, not my terror. He reached me, each step measured. He did not offer a smile. He offered his arm. "Your Grace," I whispered, curtsying as deep as I could, my gaze fixed on the floor. "My Duchess," he replied. His voice was a surprise, rich, steady, and utterly exhausted. "I believe this cake requires our mutual attention." A titter ran through the crowd. "He'll collapse into it." The unspoken words hung in the air. He positioned himself beside the table, setting his heavy, ornate cane against it. Then he placed his large, warm hand over mine on the knife. His touch was not what I expected. It was solid, grounding. "Do not fear," he murmured, so low only I could hear. "I have no intention of becoming one with the buttercream today." "I did not think you would, Your Grace," I managed to whisper back. "Yet you tremble." "The room watches us with vulture's eyes." A ghost of something, amusement, defiance, touched his lips. "Then let them feast on disappointment." Together we pressed the blade down. It slid through the layers with a soft sigh. His hand was utterly steady. For that one moment, he was just a man, and I was just a woman performing a simple, shared task. When the first slice fell, a smattering of hollow applause echoed. Alistair lifted a piece on a silver fork. Every breath in the room was held. This was the moment, the bride feeding the groom, the grotesque parody they'd all come to see. But he didn't raise it to my lips. He set it gently on the plate before me. "I think we have performed enough for our audience," he said quietly, retrieving his cane. I saw the slight tremor in his hand as he gripped it, the barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. My aunt's voice cut through the murmurs. "Surely you do not mean to retire so early, Your Grace. The celebration has barely begun." Alistair turned, and I felt the shift in him. The weary groom was gone, replaced by the Duke. "The Duchess," he said, the words dropping like stones, "has endured enough scrutiny for one evening, as have I." He offered his arm again. "Come, Alara." The use of my name, my real name, shocked me more than his defiance. I placed my hand on his arm, feeling the immense strength in it, and also the way he leaned into that strength just to stand. We walked out, leaving the whispers to boil behind us. As we reached the cavernous entrance hall, he spoke, his voice barely a breath. There are 246 steps between this hall and my private chambers. I counted them this morning. I looked at his face, etched with pain and pride, and something in me broke and remade itself all at once. Then we shall count them together, I said. For the first time all day, a real smile, fragile and surprised, touched his eyes. Together. The climb was an eternity, a silent, grueling pilgrimage. I matched his pace to his, step by agonizing step. He did not speak, saving every ounce of breath for the battle with gravity. Servants lined the corridors, their faces carefully blank, but I saw the truth in their eyes. They loved him, and they feared for him. When we finally reached the door to the ducal apartments, he was ash-white, his breathing a ragged saw in his chest. A footman opened the door to a sitting room larger than my aunt's entire house. "Your chambers are through there," Alistair said, gesturing with his cane toward an adjoining door. "If anything is not to your liking, tell Mrs. Bird, the housekeeper." The formality was jarring. We were man and wife, yet strangers in a palace. He moved to a high-backed chair near the fireplace and sank into it with a relief so profound it was painful to witness. He closed his eyes, and for a moment the Duke vanished, leaving only a man at the very end of his endurance.
"Shall I ring for tea, Your Grace?" I asked, lost. "No," he said, opening those piercing gray eyes. "Sit, please. We have little time before your aunt arrives, and there are things you must understand." "Aunt Cordelia? Here?" "She will come. She will cite a forgotten item or a duty to see you settled. In truth, she will come to remind you of your place." As if summoned, a sharp knock sounded. The footman entered. "Your Grace, Lady Cordelia Vance insists upon seeing the Duchess. She says it is urgent." Alistair's eyes met mine. "Admit her." My aunt swept in, a storm of false concern. "My dear child, I had to ensure you were comfortable on this most significant night." She barely glanced at Alistair. "Ilara, you must understand your position. His Grace has been generous." "I am aware of my duties, Aunt." "Are you?" Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper meant to carry. "The Duke's physicians are quite clear. He will not see the new year. You are, in essence, a temporary wife. Be decorative, be quiet, be grateful, and when the time comes, mourn prettily. A young, wealthy widow has prospects, but only if she is not overly attached." The cruelty of it, spoken here in this room on this night, stole the air from my lungs. "That is enough." Alistair's voice was a whip-crack. He stood, the effort monumental, but his authority was absolute. "You have delivered your poison, Lady Vance. Now get out." My aunt's mask slipped, revealing pure fury. "I only speak the truth for her own good." "The only truth here is your avarice. Leave. My wife and I wish to be alone." The word wife hung in the air like a shield. Defeated, Aunt Cordelia shot me a final, warning glare and left. The silence she left behind was trembling. I was a placeholder, a temporary convenience. I had known it, but to hear it spelled out so brutally? "Ilara," Alistair's voice was gentle now. "Look at me." I raised my eyes, expecting pity, but finding only fierce compassion. Everything she said was designed to make you small, to make you manageable, but I did not marry you to acquire a decorative prisoner counting the days until my death. Then why? The question burst from me, raw and aching. Why me? If you knew her nature, why agree to this?
Wilt thou
He was
have this
quiet
man
for
to
a
be thy
long
wedded
moment,
husband?
staring
will.
into the
Who
fire.
giveth this woman to
When
be
he
married?
spoke,
I do.
his voice was heavy with a past I couldn't see. "Because I made a promise to your mother," he said, "and because you deserved better than to be sold to the monsters she was negotiating with." My heart stopped. You knew my mother? I did, and that, he said, his gaze meeting mine full of sorrow and resolve, is a story for tomorrow. For now, know this. You are not temporary. You are the Duchess of Blackwood, and that title carries power. Power you are going to need. He gestured to my chamber door. Rest. Tomorrow we begin. As I walked to my room, his final words followed me, a promise and a warning. The trembling girl who had stood by the cake was gone. In her place was a duchess with a mystery to unravel, a man to understand, and a battle to fight. The wedding was over. The real story was just beginning. Sunlight. I woke drowning in it, streaming through windows taller than ancient trees, falling across sheets of impossibly fine linen. For one blissful moment, I was weightless. Then memory crashed down, heavy as the gold wedding band on my finger. A soft knock. A maid I didn't know entered, her smile kind but cautious. Good morning, Your Grace. I am Clara. His Grace asked that you join him in the portrait gallery when you are ready. He laid out a morning dress of soft dove gray. He said, there is no rush. No rush. In my aunt's house, every minute was accounted for, a step in the dance of securing a future. Here, time felt different, slippery and laced with apprehension. After a silent breakfast alone in a sun-drenched room, I found the portrait gallery, and I found him. Alastair stood before a full-length mirror, dressed impeccably, his back to me, but I could see his reflection. His face was a mask of such intense, quiet frustration that I stopped in the doorway. He saw me in the glass. Punctual, he said, his voice gravelly. He didn't turn. Tell me, Ilara, what do you see? I stepped closer, unsure. I see the Duke of Blackwood, Your Grace. A bitter smile touched his lips. Look again. Tell me what they see, what all of London sees. I forced myself to look, truly look. The man was broad, powerful in frame, but his body bore a weight that seemed to pull him toward the earth. His face, with its strong bones and intelligent gray eyes, was softened by a fullness that spoke of illness, not indulgence. His hands, resting on the head of his cane, were capable, but the knuckles were slightly swollen. They say I am a living insult to his memory. Something fierce rose in my chest. You need not attend if it causes you pain. Pain I can endure. His eyes flashed. It is pity I cannot stomach. It is the assumption of my incompetence I will not tolerate. He took a step toward me, and I saw the warrior beneath the suffering. Every appearance I make is an act of defiance. So tonight, you will not falter. You will not allow me to be seen as a weakness. You will stand beside me, and we will face the servile gaze together. We'll wear something magnificent. You will smile, and together we will show them that the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood are not to be dismissed. He was asking me to join him in this fight, this performance. And after? I asked softly, when we return home and the performance ends. His gaze faltered, the defiance melting into stark, vulnerable truth. After, I will sit in that chair for an hour, unable to move. My valet, Griffin, will bring compresses for the swelling in my ankles. I will take the laudanum that clouds my mind but dulls me ache in my joints, and I will sleep fitfully, knowing I must rise and do it all again. The raw honesty was a physical blow. This was his life, a relentless, grueling cycle of pain and pretense. There must be another way, I breathed. A different physician? A treatment? I have seen 17 physicians. The weariness in his voice was endless. From London's most esteemed to charlatans in Bath promising miracle waters. They all say the same. Eat less, move more, have more discipline. As if I have not tried, as if this, he gestured to his body, were a simple failure of will. He moved to the window, looking out over the gardens he likely couldn't walk. I have documentation, Ilara, meticulous records. Every meal, every symptom, for 8 years. I have proven to myself that their treatments are not just ineffective, they make me worse. Starvation makes me weaker. Their purges leave me debilitated. But to them, the data is irrelevant. The conclusion is fixed. The patient is at fault. A spark ignited in my mind. Where are these records? He looked at me, startled. In my study. Why? Because I want to see the proof. You said you married me to fulfill a promise to my mother. Let me help you fulfill your own quest for answers. For a long moment, he simply stared. I saw the doubt, the fear of hope, the instinct to push away. But I also saw a flicker of something else, a man who had been alone in this battle for a very long time. Very well, he said, his voice low, but first the promise, the one I made to Lady Eleanor. My mother, my heart clenched. He led me not to his study, but to the library, a cavern of knowledge and shadow. From a locked drawer in his desk, he withdrew not a document, but a small, familiar locket. My mother's locket. My breath hitched. How? He gave it to me the last time I saw her, about a year before she died. He opened it. Inside was not a portrait, but a tiny, folded piece of parchment. He handed it to me with reverence. In my mother's elegant ink, it read, "For Alistair, who understands the weight the world puts upon a person. Keep fighting, and if the day comes when you see my Ellie in need, lift her weight, as you wished someone had lifted yours. Eleanor." Tears blurred the careful ink. She had known about my aunt's ambitions, known about my fate. "Your mother was the only one," Alistair said quietly, "who ever looked at me and did not see a failing. She saw a man struggling against a current no one else could perceive. She showed me kindness when I had forgotten what it looked like." He met my eyes. When I learned Lady Cordelia was negotiating with men like Lord Greville, who buries wives, and Sir Roland Vane, whose tastes are monstrous, I knew the day had come. The promise had to be kept. "So you outbid them," I whispered, the pieces slotting into place. "You didn't choose me. You rescued me." "He chose to rescue you," he corrected gently. "There is a difference. This marriage, it is a protective covenant, Alara. I give you my name, my protection, my resources. You give me your company and the chance to honor a good woman's last wish. When I am gone, you will be free, wealthy, and utterly beyond your aunt's reach." The selflessness of it was staggering. He had tied his life to mine, not for gain, but for a debt of kindness. The cage of my marriage suddenly had an open door, but looking at him, at the pain in his eyes, the fierce intelligence, the lonely, stubborn pride, I realized I didn't want to walk out that door. Not yet. "Show me," I said, my voice stronger now. "Show me your records. Show me the proof." He searched my face, then nodded slowly. "All right, but it is not a pleasant sight. It is a chronicle of a slow siege." He led me to his private study. The cabinet of journals stood like a tombstone. He handed me the most recent volume. I opened it, and I began to read the story of his war. March 12th. Woke at 4 a.m., heart fluttering like a trapped bird, ankles so swollen the skin shine, weight 24 stone, breakfast, water porridge, no sugar, estimated 180 calories. March 12th afternoon, attempted to review estate papers, lasted 20 minutes, mind fogged, impossible to concentrate, profound exhaustion as if weighted with sand. March 12th evening, broth and steamed carrot, pain in joints sharp, took the minimum dose of laudanum, dreams of drowning. Day after day, a starvation diet that would waste a healthy man to nothing, yet his weight remained, even increased. The swelling worsened, the heart palpitations grew more frequent. This was not a ledger of gluttony. It was a meticulous log of a body betraying its owner, a scientific inquiry conducted from a prison of flesh. I looked up from the pages, my eyes meeting his. In that moment, I saw not the Duke, not my rescuer, but the scientist, the fellow prisoner. "They're wrong," I said, the conviction solid in my voice. "You are not the cause. You are the evidence, and we need to find someone who can read it." For the first time, a real, unguarded hope flickered in his tired gray eyes. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was there. "Tonight," I said, closing the journal, "we go to the Rutherfords. We show them the Duke and Duchess. Tomorrow we begin looking for someone who speaks the language of your evidence." He offered me his arm, not for support, but in alliance. "Then we had best prepare for battle, Duchess." The performance awaited, but for the first time it felt like a prelude, not a sentence. The Rutherford ballroom was a shimmering cage of light and judgment. As we descended the staircase, I felt the collective gaze of the ton like a physical pressure. Was on Alistair's arm, wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that made me feel armored, not adorned. He walked beside me, every step measured, his cane a quiet, steady counterpoint to the whirl of the waltz. The whispers began immediately, a venomous hum beneath the music. "He's walking, but look how slow. She's pretty enough, poor thing. What a duty. I give him until the first dance before he has to retire." Alistair's face was a serene mask of ducal hauteur, but I felt the tension thrumming through his arm. We reached our hostess, Lady Rutherford, who greeted us with a glittering, predatory smile. "Your Grace, how remarkable you look." Her eyes swept over him, cataloging every detail. "We are so pleased you felt well enough to attend." "The pleasure is ours," Alistair replied, his voice cool and even. "My wife was eager to experience society as the Duchess of Blackwood." The emphasis on wife was deliberate. Lady Rutherford's smile tightened. She was a friend of my aunt's. The first hour was a torturous gauntlet of veiled insults and pitying looks. We stood like an island, Alistair using his cane not for show, but as a necessary prop, engaging in conversation with steely politeness. I watched him closely, noting the slight paling of his lips, the way his breathing shallowed. He was using every ounce of his formidable will, and it was draining him. Then Sir Roland Vane, one of the men my aunt had courted for my hand, sidled over, a glass of champagne in hand, his gaze oily. "Blackwood, dancing a bit tonight, or will you be saving your strength?" His eyes slid to me, lingering. Though with such a charming companion, one might find the energy. Before I could flinch, Alistair shifted slightly, placing his larger frame between Vane and me. "My dancing plans, Vane, are between myself and my Duchess, unlike your pursuits, which seem to be the concern of every gambling hell in London." His tone was conversational, but the insult landed with the precision of a dueling blade. Vane flushed and slunk away. Alistair didn't move. "I'm sorry you had to endure that," he murmured to me. "You faced him down," I whispered back, awed. "A cornered bear is still a bear, Alara," he said, a faint, grim humor in his eyes. Then he took a deeper, careful breath. "And now I believe I must prove a point." The orchestra struck up a waltz. A ripple of anticipation went through the crowd. This was the moment they were waiting for. Alistair turned to me and, with a formality that belied the madness of the act, bowed. "Duchess, may I have this dance?" It was a gauntlet thrown. To refuse would confirm his weakness. To accept was to risk a very public collapse. I placed my hand in his. "You may, Your Grace." The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. He led me to the floor, his grip firm and sure. The first steps were careful, testing, but as the music swelled, something shifted.
It wasn't grace exactly, it was determination made physical. He moved with a powerful, deliberate rhythm, using his strength to guide us. We didn't fly across the floor, but we moved with a stately, undeniable presence. I looked up at him. Beads of sweat dotted his temple, but his gaze was locked on mine, fierce and alive. He was in pain, I knew it, but he was here, defying every expectation. For 3 minutes we waltzed. It was the longest 3 minutes of my life. When the music ended, a stunned, then genuine applause broke out. We left the floor. Alistair's weight settled back onto his cane, his breathing more labored. But in his eyes was a victory so bright it hurt to see. "We should go," I said softly. "You have won." He nodded, his energy spent. The journey back to Blackwood Manor was silent. He leaned back in the carriage seat, eyes closed, his face etched with the cost of his triumph. Once home, the performance truly ended. Griffin, his valet, helped him to his chair by the fire. I saw what he had described, the profound exhaustion, the swollen ankles, the way his body seemed to surrender to the pain it had held at bay for hours. I didn't retire. I sent for cold water and cloths. When Griffin left, I knelt by the chair. Alistair's eyes opened, wary. "Let me," I said quietly, and began to gently bathe his temples. He stiffened, then, with a sigh that seemed to come from his soul, he relaxed. In the firelight, I studied his journals again, now spread on the floor beside me. "The physicians you saw," I thought out loud, "they are all English, all trained in the same schools of thought." "Where else would I go?" he asked, his voice thick with fatigue. "I don't know, but the answer isn't here." An idea, wild and fragile, began to form. "Your records show patterns. The swelling worsens with stress, not just salt. Your heart races more after their starvation diets, not less. Your body is behaving as if it's under a constant threat, hoarding everything. What if the problem isn't what you eat, but how your body processes it, a miscommunication within?" He was silent for a long time. "That is essentially what I have come to believe, but it is a theory without a practitioner." I stood, pacing before the fire. "Then we find a practitioner of the unconventional, someone who looks at the body as a system, not a moral battleground." I turned to him. "Give me leave to search, to write letters, to use your name to open doors that would be closed to a girl from Cheapside." He watched me, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "You would take on my crusade?" "It is no longer just your crusade," I said, the truth of it settling in my bones. "I am your wife, your partner in this protective covenant, and I find I am not content to stand by and watch, not when there might be answers." A slow, weary, but real smile touched his lips. "Then search, Alara. Use whatever means you must. I place my evidence and my hope in your hands." The next morning, I became a scholar. I commandeered a desk in the library, sent footmen to bookshops and the Royal Society, and began to write letters. I sought names of physicians who had worked in the colonies, in India, who studied exotic diseases and glandular functions. I wrote to medical societies in Edinburgh and Vienna. Then, a week later, a reply came, not from a society, but from a man. The paper was fine, the script precise. "To Her Grace the Duchess of Blackwood. Your letter regarding metabolic resistance and systemic inflammation was the most coherent medical query I have received from a layperson. Your observations align with research I conducted in Madras on thyroid function. The body is not a simple engine of fuel and combustion. It is an alchemy of signals. I believe I may understand what plagues His Grace. If you are willing to risk the scorn of conventional medicine, I am willing to visit. Respectfully, Dr. Elias Finch." I took the letter to Alistair in the garden, where he was attempting a short walk. I read it aloud, my voice trembling. When I finished, he stopped walking. The hope on his face was terrifying in its intensity. It was the hope of a drowning man who has just seen a rope but isn't sure if it's real. "Elias Finch," he murmured. "I've heard the name. They call him a radical, a mystic." "They called Galileo a heretic," I said, holding the letter like a lifeline. "Will you see him?" He looked from the letter to me, and in his eyes I saw the final surrender of his lonely battle. He was handing me the standard. "Yes," he said. "Write to him. Tell him to come." The battle in the ballroom was for pride. The battle that was coming would be for his life, and we were finally going to fight it with the right weapons. Dr. Elias Finch arrived on a day of relentless autumn rain. He was not what I expected. No wild-eyed mystic, but a man in his 50s, lean and weathered, with the calm, observant eyes of a naturalist. His hands, as he shook mine, were steady and clean. "Your Grace," he said, with a brief, respectful nod. He carried a worn leather bag and the scent of books and antiseptic. Alistair received him in the study, surrounded by the damning evidence of his journals. He was seated in his reinforced chair, every bit the Duke, but I saw the apprehension in the tight line of his shoulders. "Dr. Finch," Alistair said, "my wife tells me you believe you understand my condition." "I believe I may have a hypothesis," Finch corrected gently. He did not look at Alistair's size with pity or disgust, but with a keen, analytical interest. "May I?" For 3 hours, Finch conducted an examination unlike any other. He listened to Alistair's heart for an extraordinarily long time, his eyes closed in concentration. He examined his eyes, his skin, his reflexes. He pressed gently at the base of his throat. "Ah," he murmured, "the thyroid is noticeably enlarged. Did any of your previous physicians remark on this?" "They said I had a thick neck," Alistair said, his voice flat. Finch made a soft, dismissive sound. "Fools chasing symptoms, not causes. And these are your records? May I?" He spent an hour reading, occasionally asking a quiet, precise question. "This period of severe caloric restriction, the fatigue you describe here, the mental fog, it reads like a body entering a state of profound conservation, as if it believes it is starving, and so it hoards every morsel, every drop of fluid." He looked up, his gaze sharp. "Your Grace, I believe your thyroid gland, the regulator of your body's energy furnace, is failing. It is not producing the signals that tell your body to burn fuel. So your metabolism has slowed to a crawl. You are, in essence, starving in plain sight, while your body desperately tries to store every calorie as if for a famine that will never end. The weight, the fluid, the fatigue, the heart strain, they are all symptoms of this single systemic failure." The air left the room. It was the first time anyone had given a name to the enemy that wasn't gluttony or weakness. "Can it be treated?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Finch sighed, setting down a journal. "It can be managed. In Madras, I saw improvements in similar cases using extracts from animal thyroid glands. It is experimental. There are risks. Too much can make the heart race dangerously. Too little does nothing. It requires meticulous calibration, and it must be paired with a specific diet, not starvation, but consistent, nourishing food to reassure the body the famine is over. This is not a cure. It is a crutch for a broken system. But a crutch," he said, looking at Alistair, "can allow a man to walk again." Alistair was utterly still. "What are the odds?" "With your meticulous records as our guide, and with a resolve to follow a strict regimen to the letter," Finch considered, "better than the odds of you surviving another 2 years under conventional care. I will not offer false hope, but I will offer you a chance." I looked at Alistair. This was the moment, to trust the radical, the outsider, or to resign himself to the slow, pious death prescribed by society. Alistair's gray eyes found mine. In them, I saw the ghost of the young officer from the portrait, the man who charged at cannons. He looked back at Dr. Finch. "What do you need to begin?" The regimen was a revolution. It arrived in a packet of detailed instructions: thyroid extract prepared from a specialist apothecary in London, a diet plan that made Mrs. Bird blanch. No rich sauces, no sugars, no processed flours. Instead, lean proteins, specific vegetables, whole grains, all measured to the ounce, timed to the hour. It was medicine disguised as food. Implementing it was a war on a new front. Mrs. Bird protested that it was an insult to her skill. The kitchen maids were confused. I had to stand in the kitchen, a duchess in an apron, explaining that the Duke's life depended on precision. "This is not a slight to your skill," I told Mrs. Bird, who glared at the list of approved foods. "It is a challenge to it. Can you make healing taste like a feast? Can you give him strength with a spoon?" Her pride, once wounded, became engaged. She began to experiment with the allowed herbs and spices, creating broths that were deeply flavorful, vegetables roasted with rosemary and thyme. She became a general in our campaign. The first days were terrible. Alistair's body, shocked by the new substances and schedule, rebelled. He suffered headaches, nausea, and a wild swing between exhaustion and agitation. I barely left his side, tracking every symptom in my own journal, comparing it to his old records. Dr. Finch visited daily, adjusting doses with a careful hand. "This is the recalibration," he said calmly during one bad spell. "The body is learning a new language. It will fight the lesson." Then, after a week, a morning dawned differently. I entered Alistair's room to find him already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed. The gray, puffy pallor of his face was less pronounced. "Alara," he said, and his voice sounded clearer. I slept. Not well, but I slept. And my mind, it feels less full of wool. It was a small thing, a tiny retreat of the enemy, but it was the first victory. We clung to it. I began walking with him in the gardens, at first just to the fountain, then to the old sundial. Each day, a few more steps. He still used his cane, but the grip was lighter, the pauses less desperate. One afternoon, as we sat on a bench by the roses, he was quiet for a long time. "You have remade my world," he said finally, not looking at me. "You have turned my household into a hospital, my kitchen into a laboratory, and my wife into a nurse. Why?" The question hung between us. I thought of my mother's locket, of the promise, of the man in the journals, fighting so bravely in the dark. "Because you kept a promise when it cost you everything," I said softly, "and because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about a promise and started being about you." He turned his head then, and the look in his eyes was so vulnerable, so full of a feeling I couldn't yet name, that it stole my breath. Our fragile, hopeful peace was shattered the next day. A letter arrived, not by post, but by court messenger. Thick parchment, a formal seal. It was a petition for lunacy, filed with the Court of Chancery. The petitioner? Lady Cordelia Vance. She claimed her niece, the young Duchess, was under the sway of a radical charlatan, and that the Duke, in his physically and mentally enfeebled state, was being manipulated into dangerous treatments, squandering his estate, and required the protection of a guardianship. Her proposed guardian? Herself. The rope of hope we had been climbing was suddenly being sliced from above. The legal document felt like ice in my hands. The words swam before my eyes: mental incapacity, undue influence, dangerous and experimental treatments, protection of the estate. Aunt Cordelia's vengeance was not to be a social snub or a cruel letter. It was to be a legal evisceration, a theft of Alistair's autonomy cloaked in the righteous language of concern. I found him in the study, already with Mr. Selby, his solicitor. Selby's face was grim. "She is clever," Selby said, adjusting his spectacles. "She uses His Grace's own condition against him. His physical decline is undeniable. His turn to unconventional medicine can be painted as evidence of a disordered mind. easily manipulated by a young, ambitious wife. She has affidavits from 2 of the physicians His Grace dismissed, confirming his irrational rejection of their sound advice. Alistair sat perfectly still, his face a blank marble mask, but I saw the storm in his eyes, the fury, the humiliation, the fear. To have his private struggle, his search for answers, paraded before a court as proof of his madness, it was the ultimate violation. "What happens if she wins?" I asked, my voice trembling. "If the court declares His Grace non compos mentis," Selby said gently, as if breaking terrible news, "Lady Cordelia, as the petitioner and your closest relative, would almost certainly be appointed his guardian and trustee of the Blackwood estates. She would have absolute control over his person, his finances, his medical care. She would dismiss Dr. Finch. She would—" he glanced at Alistair, pained. "She would have the authority to commit him to an institution for his own safety and treatment." The room tilted. She wouldn't just steal his money, she would lock him away. She would hand him back to the physicians whose care was killing him. She would erase him. "No," I said, the word a flat, hard stone. Alistair finally looked at me, his expression bleak. "Ilara, the law is a tool for those who know how to wield it. She has constructed a narrative that will be seductive to old men on a bench who think wives should be ornamental and foreign medicine is witchcraft. Then we give them a different narrative," I said, standing. The fear was being burned away by a cold, clear rage. "We have 3 weeks until the hearing, 3 weeks to build our own case, not with whispers and affidavits, but with proof." "What proof?" Mr. Selby asked. "Him," I said, pointing to Alistair. "Living, breathing, improving proof. Dr. Finch's medical testimony, the Duke's own journals presented not as madness, but as brilliant self-documentation, testimony from the staff who have seen his transformation, testimony from me." "Your testimony will be dismissed as biased, Your Grace," Selby said kindly. "You are his wife. I am also the person who has been at his side night and day. I have the data. I have the records of his improvement under Dr. Finch's care. Charts, measurements, dates." I began to pace, ideas firing. "We need a physician of standing to examine him now for the court. We need Mr. Selby to depose the staff. We need to turn those journals into a weapon for the defense." I stopped before Alistair. "You said every appearance was an act of defiance. This is our greatest performance. We will walk into that courtroom and we will show them a duke in command of his faculties and a duchess who is not a pawn, but a partner. We will make them see the truth." The despair in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a familiar, stubborn fire, the fire that had made him waltz. "It is a tremendous risk. If we fight and lose—" "If we do not fight, we have already lost," I said fiercely. "I did not spend these weeks fighting for your life just to surrender it to her without a battle." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The Somerset pride," he murmured. "The Blackwood pride," I corrected, "and it is just getting started. Mr. Selby, engage the best barrister in London who isn't afraid of a fight. Dr. Finch, prepare your testimony as if you are addressing the Royal Society. Alistair," I said, turning to him, my voice softening, "your job is only to get stronger. Every step, every clear-headed moment is ammunition." The household mobilized for a new kind of war. Dr. Finch's regimen became our battle plan. I created a new journal tracking every positive change with obsessive detail: resting heart rate, ankle circumference, minutes of sustained activity, clarity of conversation. Mrs. Bird's kitchen became a fortress providing our arsenal of healing food. Alistair improved in fits and starts. There were bad days, setbacks that filled me with dread, but the trend was undeniable. The puffiness in his face receded, revealing the sharp, intelligent lines beneath. His walks grew longer. The cane was used more for balance than support. The gray exhaustion in his eyes began to lift, replaced by a growing, wary light. One afternoon, 10 days before the hearing, a breakthrough. I was reading in the library when he entered, without his cane. He walked to the window and back, steadily, before sitting opposite me. "I found I didn't need it today," he said, as if commenting on the weather. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. This was evidence. This was our victory. I recorded it in the journal. The night before the hearing, we stood in the portrait gallery. He was dressed in a new coat tailored to his changing form. He looked at the painting of his father, then at his own reflection. "I am not him," he said quietly. "I will never be that man again." "No," I agreed, coming to stand beside him. "You are the man who survived what would have broken him. You are the man who fought when everyone told him to surrender. That is a different kind of strength, and the court needs to see it." He turned to me, taking both my hands in his. His were warm, steady. "Ilara, no matter what happens tomorrow, know that you have given me back my life, not just the physical part, the hope, the fight. You have been my partner, my ally, my miracle." My heart hammered against my ribs. The air between us crackled with something unspoken, something that had grown in the quiet spaces between medical doses and shared struggles. "We win tomorrow," I whispered, a vow, together, and then we build the life we've been fighting for. He lifted my hand and pressed his lips gently to my knuckles. It was not a kiss of passion, but one of profound respect, of partnership sealed. It was the most halal, most meaningful touch I had ever known. "Together," he echoed. The next morning, we descended the stairs of Blackwood Manor. Alistair took them slowly, carefully, but without the cane. He held my arm not for support, but in solidarity. We entered the carriage not as a doomed duke and his child bride, but as the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood, armed with truth, marching into the lion's den to reclaim their future. The courtroom awaited, but for the first time I was not afraid. I was angry, and I was ready. The Court of Chancery was a tomb of polished oak and cold ambition. The air smelled of dust, old paper, and the cloying scent of hypocrisy. We took our seats at the front, Alistair and I side by side, Mr. Selby and our barrister, the formidable Sir Robert Latham, before us. Across the aisle, Aunt Cordelia sat, a statue of false concern in black silk. She did not look at me. The presiding magistrate, Lord Pembroke, was an ancient man with eyes like chips of flint. He began the proceedings with a weary sigh, as if we were all a dreadful inconvenience. Lady Cordelia's barrister, Mr. Fox, rose. He was a ferret of a man, with a voice that dripped honey and arsenic. He painted a masterpiece of deceit. He spoke of Alistair's well-documented and tragic physical decline, of his increasing isolation and erratic behavior. He described me as a girl of 18, pliable and impressionable, thrust into a world far beyond her understanding and tragically swayed by the dangerous theories of a charlatan. He called his witnesses. Dr. Morrison, the physician Alistair had dismissed, testified with pious regret. His Grace refused sound medical advice. He became obsessed with his own theories, with these diaries of despair. It was a classic symptom of a mind turning inward, rejecting reality. A shopkeeper swore he'd seen Alistair buy vast quantities of superplums. A society matron, a friend of my aunt's, spoke of how confused and slow the Duke had seemed at the Rutherford ball. With every word the narrative solidified, a weak, dying man and his foolish child's bride. I felt Alistair's hand tighten on the arm of his chair, his knuckles white. The humiliation was a living thing in the room, choking us. Then it was Sir Robert's turn. He stood, a mountain of quiet authority. "My lord, the case presented is a fiction woven from malice and greed. It ignores one central, undeniable fact. The Duke of Blackwood is not declining. He is improving, and we will prove it." He called Dr. Finch. Finch took the stand with the calm of a scholar. He explained thyroid function, metabolic rates, and systemic inflammation, not with jargon, but with simple, powerful metaphors. He held up one of Alistair's journals. This is not the ramblings of a disordered mind. This is a meticulous 8-year longitudinal study of a disease process. It is the work of a brilliant man using the only tool he had, observation, to understand his enemy. His conclusions, which his previous physicians dismissed, are now supported by the latest medical research from Vienna. Mr. Fox sneered. Research from foreign mystics, no doubt. Finch didn't flinch. Science is not bound by geography, sir. Ignorance is. He then presented his own charts, comparing Alistair's symptoms before and after his treatment, the downward trend in resting heart rate, the reduction in edema, the increase in stamina. The numbers were stark, undeniable. Next, Sir Robert called Mr. Selby, who presented estate records showing Alistair's business dealings had become more astute in recent months, not less. Then he called Mrs. Bird. My proud, stubborn cook stood in the witness box, her chin high. "He's eating proper now, me lord," she said, her voice clear. "Food as medicine, I make it, and he's getting stronger. I see it every day. We all do." He called Griffin, the valet, who spoke of Alistair addressing himself, of needing less assistance, of the light returning to his eyes. The narrative was shifting, but the crucial moment came when Sir Robert said, "My lord, I call his grace the Duke of Blackwood." A murmur swept the room. A petitioner for lunacy rarely took the stand. It was too risky. Alistair looked at me. I gave the smallest nod. "Show them." He rose, and he walked to the witness box. He didn't shuffle, he didn't use his cane, which lay forgotten on our table. He walked with a steady, deliberate pace that spoke of control, not collapse. The courtroom watched, utterly silent. He took the oath, his voice firm and clear. Sir Robert's questions were gentle but precise, allowing Alistair to explain in his own intelligent, measured words his search for a diagnosis, his rational decision to seek Dr. Finch's help, his understanding of the treatment. "Why did you reject the advice of 17 physicians?"
"Because their advice was killing me," Alistair said, his gaze direct. "And I had the data to prove it. When a course of action leads repeatedly to a worse outcome, a rational man seeks a different course. That is not madness, it is logic." Mr. Folks leapt up for cross-examination, a predatory gleam in his eye. He tried to trip Alistair up on medical details, on dates, to provoke him into anger or confusion. Alistair remained calm, precise, referencing his own journals with flawless memory. He was not a confused invalid. He was a commanding, intelligent peer, explaining a complex scientific problem with patience. With every answer, Mr. Folks's bluster deflated. Finally, frustrated, Folks snapped, "And your wife, your grace? Is it not true she has taken over your household, dictates your meals, your schedule? Is that not undue influence?" Alistair looked at him, then slowly, deliberately, turned his gaze to me. His expression softened into something that made my breath catch. "My wife," he said, his voice filling the quiet room, "saw a man drowning and threw him a rope. She saw data where others saw failure. She fought for me when I had ceased to fight for myself. That is not influence. That is love. That is partnership, and I thank God for it every day." The words hung in the air, profound and simple. Love, partnership. They were not the words of a manipulated fool. Sir Robert saved his final move for last. "My lord, we have one final witness, Her Grace, the Duchess of Blackwood." I stood, my legs trembling, but my head high. I took the stand. I told my story, not as a girl sold, but as a woman who made a choice to trust her husband's mind. I showed the court my journal, the record of his improvement in my hand. I spoke of specific days, specific gains. I was not emotional. I was factual, a scientist presenting findings. When Mr. Folks cross-examined me, trying to paint me as a gold-digging adventuress, I met his eyes. "I came into this marriage with nothing but a debt," I said calmly. I have asked for nothing. I have only given care. If my ambition was wealth, I would have done as my aunt wished and let nature take its course. I am here because I choose my husband's life over his fortune." Lord Pembroke called for a recess. The wait in an antechamber was agony. Alistair held my hand, saying nothing. His palm was damp, but his grip was sure. When we were recalled, Lord Pembroke's face was unreadable. He cleared his throat. "This court has heard testimony of a most conflicting nature," he began, his voice dry. "On one hand, concerns from family. On the other, evidence of medical progress and clear mental faculty." He looked at Alistair, then at me. "The law on lunacy exists to protect the vulnerable from exploitation. Having observed His Grace's testimony, his clarity of thought, his command of detail, and having seen the documented medical evidence of improvement under the care of Dr. Finch, this court finds no evidence of mental incapacity." A gasp, then a rush of whispers. "The petition is denied. Costs will be borne by the petitioner. This court finds the Duke of Blackwood fully competent to manage his person and his estates." Aunt Cordelia shot to her feet, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She stared at me, and in that look was a promise of endless war. Then she turned and stormed from the courtroom, her defeat absolute. The victory was quiet, immense, and flooding. We walked out of the courthouse into the gray London day, and it felt like stepping into sunlight. Alistair stopped on the steps, took a deep, full breath of the sooty air, and looked at me. "We won," he said, as if he couldn't believe it. "We did," I said, tears finally spilling over. "You are free." He didn't smile. His eyes were terribly serious. "No, Ilara," he said softly, taking both my hands. "We are free." In that moment, the protective covenant dissolved. What remained was the partnership he had spoken of, the partnership that had just conquered a courtroom, and I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that I never wanted it to end. The return to Blackwood Manor was a triumph. The staff, who had been holding their collective breath, erupted in quiet, joyful celebration. Mrs. Bird prepared a feast that miraculously stayed within Dr. Finch's guidelines, yet tasted of victory. For the first time, Alistair and I dined together, not as patient and caretaker, but as a duke and duchess who had won a war. The change in him was accelerating. Freed from the shadow of the petition, the last of the tension seemed to leave his body. He walked daily in the gardens, his strides longer, his breathing easy. The cane became an occasional accessory, then a relic left in the hall. His mind, always sharp, now shone without the fog of pain and constant calculation. He began to take back the reins of his vast estate, meeting with stewards, his decisions crisp and confident. And between us, something new and fragile blossomed. We spent evenings in the library, talking of everything and nothing, books, politics, his youth, my childhood dreams. The conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and quiet understanding. He looked at me differently now, not with gratitude alone, but with a deep, wondering affection that made my breath catch. "My wife," he said, his voice filling the quiet room, "saw a man drowning and threw him a rope. She saw data where others saw failure. She fought for me when I had ceased to fight for myself. That is not influence. That is love. That is partnership, and I thank God for it every day." He was interrupted by a frantic knocking at the front door. Moments later, Griffin entered, his face pale. "Your Grace, a messenger from the home farm at Oakhaven. There's been a fire." The peaceful world shattered. Oakhaven was the most profitable of Alistair's tenant farms, providing grain for half the county. We rode out at first light. The scene was one of devastation. The great barn was a skeleton of blackened timbers, the stored harvest for the winter gone. The farmer, Mr. Hodge, stood with his family amidst the ruins, their faces smudged with soot and despair. "It started in the night, Your Grace," Here Grace said, his voice breaking. "No lightning, no one in the barn. It just went up." Alistair moved through the wreckage, his face grim. He asked quiet, precise questions about grain stores, about insurance, about the family's immediate needs. He promised immediate aid, timber for rebuilding, grain from other estates. He was every inch a good landlord, strong and compassionate. But as we walked the perimeter, he stopped, bending to pick something up from the mud, a small, charred tin, the kind used for lantern oil. He sniffed it, his expression turning to stone. "This didn't come from the barn," he said quietly to me, "and it's half full. Someone dropped it fleeing." Sabotage. The word hung unspoken in the cold air. We returned home heavy with suspicion. The next day, a report came from another estate, a prized bull found poisoned. The day after, a threatening letter arrived, addressed to me. It was crudely written on cheap paper. "Know your place, Duchess, or worse will follow. You don't belong here." The fear returned, cold and slithering. The victory in court had not ended the war, it had simply changed the battlefield. Aunt Cordelia had been publicly humiliated and fined a substantial sum. She was not a woman to forgive, and she had friends, ruthless, connected friends who might act where the law could not. "It's her," I said to Alistair that night, the letter trembling in my hand. "It's her, or someone she's paid." He took the letter, his jaw tight. "It's a campaign of intimidation, to make us afraid, to make you feel unwelcome, unsafe, to drive a wedge." He looked at me, his gray eyes hard. "She wants to prove she can still hurt us, that my protection is not enough." A new kind of fury ignited in me. She had tried to lock him away. Now she was threatening the people and places he loved. She was attacking our peace. "Then we must prove her wrong," I said, my voice cold. "We must be stronger. We must be more present. We must show every tenant, every servant, that we are united and unbreakable." We began a progress of the estates, not as distant nobility, but as the lord and lady of the land. Alistair, stronger now, could ride for short periods. We visited every farm, every village. He listened to concerns, settled disputes, approved repairs. I spoke with the women, visited the sick, helped organize a village school. We were visible. We were present. We were their Duke and Duchess. The Blackwood Pride became more than a phrase. It became a shield. The tenants closed ranks. Suspicious strangers were noted. The anonymous letters kept coming, but they began to feel desperate, pathetic. Yet the attacks grew bolder. One night, a shot was fired through the window of our London house, shattering glass over the bed we would have occupied had we not stayed in the country. It was a message. I can reach you anywhere. Alistair's rage was a quiet, terrifying thing. He doubled the watch on the estates. He hired investigators to trace the source of the threats. But our enemy was cunning, working through layers of intermediaries. The strain began to tell. The shadow was back, dimming the bright new world we were building. Dr. Finch warned that the stress could trigger a regression in Alistair's health. We were sitting in the study one evening, maps of the estates spread before us, trying to predict the next target, when the fatigue and fear finally overwhelmed me. A tear escaped, tracing a path down my cheek. Alistair was beside me in an instant. "Elara," he said, "I'm so tired of being afraid. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder. I just wanted this, you, peace." He pulled me into his arms. It was the first true embrace we had ever shared. I felt the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. He was no longer frail. He was my fortress. "Listen to me," he said, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "She is trying to steal our peace because it is the one thing she can never have. We will not let her. We have faced physicians and courts. We will face this cowardice together.
and we will win." He pulled back, cupping my face in his hands. His thumb brushed away my tear. In his eyes was not just partnership, not just affection, but a love so deep and sure it stole the breath from my lungs. "I love you, Alara Vance Thorn," he said, the words simple, irrevocable. I did not expect it. I did not dare to hope for it. But I love you, and no petty vengeance from a bitter woman will touch what is between us. Do you understand? The world narrowed to his face, to the truth in his eyes. All the fear melted away, burned up by a joy so fierce it was terrifying. "I love you too, Alistair," I breathed. "I think I have for a long time." He didn't kiss me. He rested his forehead against mine, a gesture of profound intimacy, of souls touching. "Then we are invincible," he whispered. And in that moment, I believed him. The threat still lurked in the dark, but we stood together in the light, and our love was a weapon stronger than any our enemy possessed. The final battle was coming, but now we were truly ready. Love made us bold, but it did not make us foolish. The attacks had shifted from property to direct threats against us. The shot through the London window was a line crossed. Alistair's investigators, a pair of discreet former Bow Street runners named Croft and Bell, had been following a cold trail of paid ruffians and anonymous tavern whispers. It all led back to a shadowy figure known only as the broker, a fixer for the wealthy who wanted dirty work done without trace. "He's a ghost, Your Grace," Croft reported, frustration etching his face. "Paid in untraceable gold, uses different cutouts every time, but the orders, they have the feel of someone with a personal grudge, someone who enjoys the cruelty." Aunt Cordelia, it had to be, but without proof, we were chasing smoke. The breaking point came with an attack not on property, but on a person. Old Micah, the head groom who had taught Alistair to ride as a boy, was found beaten in the stables one morning. His whispered words to Alistair before slipping into unconsciousness were, told him the Duke were a good man. They said the Duchess had to learn." Rage, cold and purifying, settled over Alistair. The compassionate landlord vanished, replaced by the steel-willed commander. "They touch my people to get to you," he said to me, his voice deadly calm. "This ends now." He devised a plan, a trap. We would announce a small, intimate dinner party at Blackwood Manor, a celebration of his continued recovery. The guests list would be leaked. A few close friends, Dr. Finch, and notably Mr. Arthur Selby, the solicitor, who would be carrying important revised financial documents for the Duke to sign, supposedly altering his will in my favor. "The bait," Alistair explained. "Cordelia's greed is her compass. The thought of me securing my fortune irrevocably to you, cutting her out completely, will be unbearable. If she's behind this, she'll make a move to intercept those documents or to stop the signing. She'll have to show her hand." It was dangerous. It put us and our friends in the line of fire. But the alternative, a life of waiting for the next attack, was worse. The night of the dinner arrived. The manor was lit with a warm, inviting glow. Laughter and conversation flowed in the dining room. But beneath the surface, tension thrummed. Croft and Bell and a few other trusted men were stationed around the house and grounds. Alistair had a pistol discreetly placed in his study, where he and Mr. Selby would ostensibly retire after dessert to review the papers. I played my part, smiling, chatting, but my heart was a frantic bird in my chest. I watched Alistair. He was magnificent, the perfect host, his health and vigor on display, a living rebuke to all his aunt's claims. His eyes would meet mine across the table, steadying me. As dessert was cleared, Alistair rose. "Mr. Selby, if you would join me in the study. The rest of you, please enjoy the port. We shall return shortly." The moment they left, the atmosphere in the dining room shifted. Our friends, who were in on the plan, kept up the lively chatter, but I saw their eyes dart to the doors. I excused myself, pleading a slight headache, and slipped into the darkened hallway that led to the study. I waited in a shadowed alcove, as planned. My palms were slick with sweat. The grandfather clock ticked, each second a lifetime. Then a noise, not from the study, but from the servant's passage beside me, a faint scrape. I held my breath. The hidden door to the passage, used only by staff, eased open. A figure slipped out, cloaked in black, moving with silent purpose toward the study door. In the dim light, I saw the glint of a pistol. It wasn't Aunt Cordelia. It was a man, tall and rangy. The broker's hand, here to stop the signing, permanently if necessary. He pressed his ear to the study door, then slowly turned the handle. As the door cracked open, I saw Alistair and Mr. Selby standing by the empty fireplace, their backs to him. The intruder raised his pistol. Terror screamed through me, but a deeper instinct took over. I didn't think. I stepped out of the shadows. "The Duke is not alone," I said, my voice ringing clear in the hall. The man whirled, his pistol swinging toward me. In that split second of distraction, Alistair moved. He was no invalid. He was a whirlwind of controlled force. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hand closing on his wrist with a crack. The pistol clattered to the floor. Alistair drove his shoulder into the man, slamming him against the wall, pinning him there with an arm across his throat. Croft and Bell erupted from the other end of the hallway. It was over in seconds. The man, a hired thug named Diggs, was trussed and gagged. Under the threat of transportation, he broke quickly. He was hired by the broker. He'd been paid to steal the will documents and, if that failed, to create a tragic accident for the Duke. He confirmed the orders came from a woman, though he'd never seen her face, but he gave a location, an inn where the broker conducted business. Alistair looked at me, his chest heaving, not from exertion, but from the aftershock of fear for me. "You were supposed to stay in the dining room," he said, his voice raw. "And let him shoot you in the back?" I retorted, my own body beginning to shake. He pulled me to him, holding me so tightly I could feel the frantic beat of his heart. "Never do that again," he whispered into my hair. "Never." But we had our lead, the broker's inn. Alistair, Croft, Bell, and a magistrate arrived at the inn at dawn. They found the broker, a sleazy, sharp-faced lawyer named Crouch, in the middle of burning his ledgers. He was arrested, and in his possession they found one not fully charred page, a list of payments, and next to the latest entry, a name not written in code, but in a familiar, elegant script, C. Vance. It was the proof, the direct link to Aunt Cordelia. We had her. The proof was ironclad, a signed page from the broker's ledger detailing payment for services including arson, poison, threats, and ultimately, terminal resolution re the Duke of Blackwood. The handwriting expert confirmed the annotation as Lady Cordelia Vance's. Diggs, the thug, turned King's evidence in exchange for his life. The magistrate, a friend of Alistair's father, was grim-faced. "This is beyond scandal, Blackwood. This is conspiracy to commit murder. She will hang." The news spread through London like wildfire. The society that had once pitied me now recoiled in horror at my aunt's crimes. The woman who had painted herself as a concerned guardian was revealed as a venomous plotter. Her friends deserted her. Her name became mud. Aunt Cordelia was arrested at her townhouse. She did not go quietly. She screamed curses, her elegant facade shattering into a rage of pure spite. She demanded to see me. Alistair forbade it. "She is poison. She will only try to hurt you one last time." But I needed to see her, to face the architect of my nightmares, not as a frightened girl, but as the Duchess she had inadvertently created. "I need to close this door myself," I told him, "with you beside me." He reluctantly agreed. We met her in a stark, cold room at the magistrate's office. She was in a plain dress, her hair coming undone, but her eyes burned with the same hatred. Come to Gold, Ellie? She sneered, the childhood nickname a weapon. I came to see the end of the story, I said, my voice calm. I stood beside Alistair, his presence a solid wall of strength at my back. You ruined everything, she hissed, her composure breaking. You were supposed to be a compliant little widow, grateful for my guidance. I would have controlled the Blackwood fortune through you. Instead, you defy me. You save this carcass of a man. You humiliate me in court. You win. I did, I said simply, and you lost. Not because of me, but because of your own greed and cruelty. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Cruelty? I was practical. You were a commodity, a burden. I found you the best market. He was supposed to die. She pointed a shaking finger at Alistair. Alistair stepped forward slightly, his voice low and dangerous. You targeted my wife. You targeted my people. You sought to destroy everything I hold dear. For that, you will face justice, not society's gossip, but the law's full measure. For the first time, a flicker of real fear entered her eyes. The reality of the gallows was dawning. Her bravado crumbled into desperate bargaining. Ellie, please, you are my blood. You cannot let them. I was your guardian. I looked at the woman who had sold me, who had tried to destroy the man I loved, who had beaten an old groom and burned a farmer's livelihood. I felt no pity, only a clean, cold finality. You ceased to be my guardian the moment you sold me, I said. The law is your guardian now, and it will deal with you justly. We turned to leave. Her scream followed us, a raw animal sound of defeat and fury. You'll regret this. You hear me? You'll never be safe. The door closed, shutting her out of our lives forever. Outside in the weak winter sun, I took a deep, shuddering breath. The poison was gone. Excised. Alistair turned me to face him. It's over, Elara. Truly over. I looked up at him, at the man who had fought his body, the courts, and a secret enemy for me. It's just beginning, I whispered. With the threat extinguished, life at Blackwood Manor transformed. The shadow was gone. The love that had grown in the struggle now bloomed in the sunlight. We were no longer Duke and Duchess playing roles, partners in a battle, or even friends in a covenant. We were a husband and wife, deeply, quietly in love. One afternoon, we walked to the old oak tree, the place where he had first shown me his progress. He no longer needed to pause for breath. He knelt, with some difficulty but no pain, and dug in the soft earth at the base of the tree. He pulled out a small, dirt-caked metal box. I buried this here when I came back from the peninsula, he said, opening it. Inside was not a soldier's trinket, but a simple, beautiful ring, a band of gold set with a single, clear sapphire. It was my grandmother's. I always thought I would give it to the woman I loved. When I fell ill, I buried it, thinking that part of my life was over. He cleaned the ring on his coat, then took my left hand. He looked into my eyes, his own shining with a vulnerability that was more powerful than any declaration. Elara Vance, you gave me back my life, my hope, my future. You are my partner, my friend, my love. This marriage began with a legal contract. Will you renew it with me now, not as a promise or a covenant, but as a true, lasting vow? Will you be my wife in every sense that word can mean? Tears of pure, untainted joy streamed down my face. This was the choice I had never been given, and it was the easiest one I would ever make. Yes, I breathed. Yes, Alistair Thorne, 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto my finger, next to my wedding band. It fit perfectly. He stood and pulled me into his arms, holding me close. He didn't kiss me, but he rested his cheek on my hair, and I felt the sacred promise in his embrace, deeper than any physical touch. We walked back to the house hand in hand, the past finally completely behind us. Ahead lay a future we had built together, piece by hard-won piece. a future bright with promise, safe in our love and hallowed in every beautiful, respectful way. Spring came to Blackwood Manor like a blessing. The gardens, once just a place for painful walks, exploded in a riot of color and scent. Alistair and I walked through them every morning, our hands linked not for support, but for connection. He was, as Dr. Finch said with satisfaction, in a state of managed wellness. He would always need the thyroid extract, always need to be mindful of his diet, but the man who had been drowning was now swimming with powerful, steady strokes. He rode his horse again, if gently. He worked in his study for hours, his mind sharper than ever. Our love born in struggle deepened in peace. It was in the quiet moments, him reading to me in the library, my head on his shoulder, me helping him review estate plans, my ideas listened to with respect. The way he would look at me across a room, his gray eyes soft with an emotion that still made my heart skip. It was a love built on respect, partnership, and a profound shared victory. It felt eternal. We decided to host a spring ball, not as an act of defiance, but as a celebration, an announcement to the world that the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood were not just present, but thriving. The night of the ball, the manor was transformed. Light blazed from every window, music floated on the warm air, and the guests who arrived, true friends, supportive neighbors, respected acquaintances, were greeted not by a dying duke and his pitied bride, but a striking couple in their prime. I wore a gown of silver blue, like moonlight on water. Alistair stood beside me in black and silver, tall, strong, his bearing that of a man completely at home in his skin. The whispers that reached us were not of pity, but of awe. "Have you ever seen such a transformation? She's breathtaking, and he looks powerful. They say she's the reason. The Somerset, no, the Blackwood Pride, they call her. Love looks good on them." We moved through our guests, Alistair's hand a warm constant at the small of my back. We danced, a waltz that was no longer a battle, but a joyful communion. We moved together perfectly, a testament to how well we knew each other now. Midway through the evening, Alistair led me to the center of the ballroom and raised his hand for silence. The music faded. "Friends," he said, his voice carrying easily, warm and confident, "my wife and I wish to thank you for celebrating with us tonight. This past year has been a journey, a difficult one, but it has led us here, to this moment of gratitude and joy." He looked down at me, his love for me plain for all to see. "There are many to thank, my devoted staff, the brilliant Dr. Finch, but most of all, I thank my Duchess. Alara, you are my strength, my wisdom, my heart. This new dawn is yours as much as it is mine." He lifted my hand, the one bearing his grandmother's sapphire beside my wedding band, and kissed it gently. The room erupted in applause, genuine and warm. Later, as the party swirled around us, I noticed a familiar, gentle face watching from the edge of the room. Dr. Finch. I excused myself and went to him. "Doctor, thank you for coming." "I wouldn't have missed it, Your Grace." He smiled, his eyes kind. "He is a medical marvel, and you are the best medicine he ever had. We owe you everything. You owe yourselves everything," he corrected. "I merely provided the key. You two had the courage to turn it." He lowered his voice. "And I have news. Because of His Grace's detailed records and our success, my paper on thyroid insufficiency has been accepted for publication. The medical world is beginning to listen. Your fight will help countless others." The news filled me with a profound sense of purpose. Our pain had not been wasted. It would become a lifeline for others lost in the same dark. As the ball wound down, Alistair and I slipped away, walking out onto the moonlit terrace. The sounds of music and laughter faded behind us, replaced by the chorus of spring peepers and the scent of night-blooming jasmine. He stood behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his chin resting on my head. We looked out over our lands, peaceful and secure. "Happy?" he murmured into my hair. "More than I ever dreamed possible. I sighed, leaning back into his strength. It feels like a dream, one I never want to wake from. It's not a dream, he said, turning me gently to face him. The moonlight silvered his features. It's our life, the one we built, and we're just getting started. He was right. We had plans, not just for the estate, but for a family, for a legacy of love, not duty, for continuing the work with Dr. Finch to fund research into glandular disorders, and to build a small hospital in the village. The Blackwood pride was no longer just about defiance. It became synonymous with compassion and progress. And then, the greatest joy, our family. 3 years after the spring ball, our daughter, Eleanor, was born. She had Alistair's clear gray eyes and my mother's gentle smile. 2 years later, a son, James, arrived, a boisterous boy with his father's stubborn chin and a laugh that echoed through the halls. Blackwood Manor, once a tomb of silence and sickness, rang with the sounds of children's laughter, pounding feet, and bedtime stories read by the fire. One crisp autumn afternoon, we were all in the garden. Alistair was on his hands and knees, pretending to be a ferocious bear, while James, squealing with delight, tried to tame him. Eleanor, more sedate, was helping me collect late-blooming roses. I watched them, my heart so full I thought it might simply dissolve into light. Alistair caught my eye over James's head. His smile, softened by fatherhood and happiness, was a sunbeam directed solely at me. In that look was a universe of shared history, of battles won, of a love that had become as essential as breath. Later, after the children were tucked in bed, we sat in our favorite spot in the library, the fire crackling. "Do you ever think of her?" I asked quietly, my head on his shoulder. I didn't need to say the name. Aunt Cordelia had been convicted on multiple counts of conspiracy, arson, and attempted murder. She was not hanged, but sentenced to permanent transportation to a penal colony. We never heard from her again. The chapter was closed. "Sometimes," Alistair said, his voice thoughtful, "not with anger anymore, with a sort of pity. She chose a path of such darkness, and it led her to nothing, while he squeezed my hand, we chose each other, and it led us to everything." He was right. Her poison had, in a twisted way, been the catalyst that forged our unbreakable bond. We had taken the tragedy she designed and rewritten it into a story of resilience and love. "Dr. Finch's book is being published next month," I said, changing the subject to brighter things. "He's dedicating it to the patient and the partner who refuse to accept the inevitable." Alistair chuckled, a rich, warm sound. "We shall have to buy 100 copies, give them to every physician in London." Our life was a tapestry woven with threads of quiet joy, purposeful work, and deep, abiding love. It was the life I had glimpsed as a possibility in those desperate early days, now lived in vibrant color. One morning, a letter arrived with a foreign postmark. It was from Dr. Finch, who was traveling in Europe, presenting his research. "My dear friends, the work you inspired is changing minds. In Vienna, I met a physician treating a similar case. He used your husband's journal excerpts, with permission of course, as a primary teaching tool. He calls it the Blackwood Case Study. You are saving lives across continents. Your legacy is not just in your beautiful children, but in countless families who will now have hope where there was none. With everlasting gratitude, Elias." I read it aloud to Alistair. He was silent for a long moment, looking out the window at the land he loved. "A legacy," he murmured. "To think, all that suffering, it can now mean something so good." He turned to me, his eyes shining. "You did that, Ilara. You saw the data not as a record of failure, but a map to a future." "We did it," I corrected, taking his hand. "Always we." The seasons turned, the children grew. Eleanor showed a keen mind for mathematics and a kind heart, often accompanying me on visits to the hospital. James was all energy and curiosity, his greatest desire to follow his father everywhere. We were a unit, a happy, noisy, loving unit. One crisp autumn afternoon, we were all in the garden. Alistair was on his hands and knees, pretending to be a ferocious bear, while James, squealing with delight, tried to tame him. Eleanor, more sedate, was helping me collect late-blooming roses. I watched them, my heart so full I thought it might simply dissolve into light. Alistair caught my eye over James's head. His smile, softened by fatherhood and happiness, was a sunbeam directed solely at me. In that look was a universe of shared history, of battles won, of a love that had become as essential as breath. It was not a formal portrait. It was a scene captured by a brilliant artist we had commissioned. It showed us in the garden, under the old oak tree. Alistair was sitting on the bench, strong and healthy, laughing. I was leaning against him, my head tilted back in laughter too. Eleanor was trying to place a daisy chain on his head, and James was a blur of motion, chasing a butterfly. It was not a picture of a duke and duchess. It was a picture of a family, of joy, of a love that had conquered everything. Beneath it, a simple plaque, "The New Dawn, the Thorne Family, Anno Domini 1833. I couldn't speak. Tears of happiness streamed down my face. Alistair wrapped his arms around me from behind. "That," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "is my favorite portrait. That is our truth. That is what we built." I turned in his arms and held him, this man who was my husband, my partner, my love. We had traveled through such darkness to reach this radiant light, and every day with him, with our children, in this home filled with love, was a gift I would never take for granted. Our story had reached its happiest chapter, but it was not the end. It was simply a beautiful, ongoing beginning. 20 years. The phrase echoed in my mind as I stood on the terrace of Blackwood Manor, watching the golden light of late summer gild the rolling hills. 20 years since I had stood frozen by a wedding cake, a girl sold into a nightmare. Now I was a woman standing in the heart of her dream, watching it bear fruit. Below me, on the great lawn, the harvest festival was in full swing. Long tables groaned with food from the estate. Mrs. Bird, now white-haired but still ruling her kitchens with an iron spoon, had outdone herself. Laughter and music swirled in the air. Tenants, villagers, and friends mingled, a vibrant tapestry of the community Alistair and I had nurtured together. My gaze found him, Alistair, my duke. At 52, there were streaks of silver in his dark hair, lines of laughter around his eyes, but he stood straight and strong, shaking hands, clapping backs, his voice a warm, confident rumble in the crowd. He was the picture of robust health, a living miracle that still filled me with awe every single day. He caught my eye and winked, a private signal that never failed to make my heart flip. Our children were no longer children. Eleanor, at 17, was the image of her namesake, my mother, graceful, intelligent, and possessing a quiet strength that belied her years. She was deep in conversation with Dr. Finch's protege, a young physician discussing her ideas for improving the village hospital's pediatric ward. James, 15, was demonstrating a new fencing move to a group of wide-eyed younger boys, his father's bearing and his own boundless energy making him a natural leader. This was our harvest, not just of wheat and barley, but of love, of trust, of a life built together from ashes. A gentle hand touched my arm. It was Mrs. Bird. "They're asking for you, Your Grace, for the toast." I nodded, taking one last look at the scene, my family, my people, my home. I walked down the terrace steps, the crowd parting from me with smiles and respectful nods. I reached the head table where Alistair waited, his hand outstretched. I took it, his grip firm and sure. He tapped his glass for silence. The happy noise settled into an expectant hush. Hundreds of faces, dear and familiar, turned toward us. "My friends," Alistair began, his voice carrying easily on the still air, "we gather today to give thanks for the harvest, for the bounty of this land that sustains us." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd, then returning to me. His expression softened into something so profoundly loving it stole my breath. He held up our joined hands. 20 years ago, I was given a companion, a partner, a woman who looked at a man the world had given up on and saw not a dying duke, but a fighter. She saw not a medical mystery, but a puzzle to be solved with courage and love. She fought for me when I could not fight for myself. She stood by me through courts and conspiracies. She gave me not just my health, but my life. And she gave us, he looked at Eleanor and James, his voice catching for a moment, the greatest treasures a man could ever know. Tears welled in my eyes. The crowd was utterly silent, captivated. This prosperity you see, Alistair continued, gesturing to the abundant feast, the happy faces, this community, it is rooted in that partnership. So today, I toast not just the harvest of the field, but the harvest of resilience, the harvest of hope, and most of all, the harvest of a love that has grown deeper and stronger with every passing season. He lifted his glass. To my wife, my Ilara, the Duchess of Blackwood, the love of my life. A roar of approval went up. To the Duchess, glasses clinked, cheers echoed. Alistair turned to me, his eyes full. He leaned close, his words for me alone. And to you, my heart, for every day of these 20 years, for every tomorrow to come. He did not kiss me. In front of everyone, he simply rested his forehead against mine, that intimate halal gesture that spoke of souls entwined. It was more powerful than any kiss could ever be. The crowd cheered louder, moved by the pure, visible love between us. The festivities continued long into the evening, with dancing and song. As twilight painted the sky in shades of rose and lavender, Alistair and I stole away, as was our tradition, to the old oak tree. We sat on the same bench, his arm around me. Fireflies began to sparkle in the gathering dusk. Happy? He asked, the same question he'd asked on a terrace long ago. I looked at him, at the man who had become my everything. I thought of the frightened girl, the determined nurse, the fierce partner, the joyful mother. I thought of the journey, the despair, the fight, the fear, and finally, the glorious, hard-won peace. Alistair, I said, my voice thick with emotion, I am so much more than happy. I am complete. I am home. In you, in our children, in this home filled with love, was a gift I would never take for granted. Our story had reached its happiest chapter, but it was not the end. It was simply a beautiful, ongoing beginning. 20 years. The phrase echoed in my mind as I stood on the terrace of Blackwood Manor, watching the golden light of late summer gild the rolling hills. 20 years since I had stood frozen by a wedding cake, a girl sold into a nightmare. Now I was a woman standing in the heart of her dream, watching it bear fruit. Below me, on the great lawn, the harvest festival was in full swing. Long tables groaned with food from the estate. Mrs. Bird, now white-haired but still ruling her kitchens with an iron spoon, had outdone herself. Laughter and music swirled in the air. Tenants, villagers, and friends mingled, a vibrant tapestry of the community Alistair and I had nurtured together. My gaze found him, Alistair, my Duke. At 52, there were streaks of silver in his dark hair, lines of laughter around his eyes, but he stood straight and strong, shaking hands, clapping backs, his voice a warm, confident rumble in the crowd. He was the picture of robust health, a living miracle that still filled me with awe every single day. He caught my eye and winked, a private signal that never failed to make my heart flip. Our children were no longer children. Eleanor, at 17, was the image of her namesake, my mother, graceful, intelligent, and possessing a quiet strength that belied her years. She was deep in conversation with Dr. Finch's protege, a young physician discussing her ideas for improving the village hospital's pediatric ward. James, 15, was demonstrating a new fencing move to a group of wide-eyed younger boys, his father's bearing and his own boundless energy making him a natural leader. This was our harvest, not just of wheat and barley, but of love, of trust, of a life built together from ashes. A gentle hand touched my arm. It was Mrs. Bird. "They're asking for you, Your Grace, for the toast." I nodded, taking one last look at the scene, my family, my people, my home. I walked down the terrace steps, the crowd parting from me with smiles and respectful nods. I reached the head table where Alistair waited, his hand outstretched. I took it, his grip firm and sure. He tapped his glass for silence. The happy noise settled into an expectant hush. Hundreds of faces, dear and familiar, turned toward us. "My friends," Alistair began, his voice carrying easily on the still air, "we gather today to give thanks for the harvest, for the bounty of this land that sustains us." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd, then returning to me. His expression softened into something so profoundly loving it
I feel
stole
so
my
at peace
breath.
with you here.
He held up our
As do I,
joined
my
hands.
love.
Let's walk.
20 years ago, I was given a companion, a partner, a woman who looked at a man the world had given up on and saw not a dying duke, but a fighter. She saw not a medical mystery, but a puzzle to be solved with courage and love. She fought for me when I